In the quiet town of Maplewood, Ohio, David Miller was known as the kind of man every neighbor respected. He grew up among the wide fields of corn and soybeans, and as an adult he still worked those same lands. Long days found him driving the combine, his clothes carrying the smell of dust and grain when he came home. People admired his steady way of living. He wasn't the type to waste money at bars or disappear without reason. His wife, Sarah, carried her own good name in the community. Before their children came along, she worked as a township clerk, keeping records and helping with town matters. People remembered her as organized and kind. When their daughter Lily was born, followed by little Ben 2 years later, Sarah gave up her job. She chose to stay home to raise them. To those looking in from outside, she seemed to fit perfectly into the role of wife and mother. Always polite, always present, always devoted. Their house wasn't the biggest on the street, but it was neat and warm. Lily could often be seen chasing Ben around the yard, their laughter floating through the air while Sarah called them in for supper. There was also Ruth, David's mother, who had lost her husband many years before. From the first day she had welcomed Sarah with open arms. While some mothers-in-law were possessive, Ruth treated Sarah like the daughter she never had. "You're a blessing to this family," she often told her friends at church. Sarah returned the affection. She leaned on Ruth for advice and invited her into the children's lives. It was common to see Ruth on the porch with Lily on her lap while Ben played at her feet. The closeness between the 3 generations made neighbors smile. At church on Sundays, women often whispered, "Sarah is so lucky. David is solid, not like other men who forget their vows." They admired how David brought home small gifts. A ribbon for Lily's hair, a toy truck for Ben, or sometimes a new dress for Sarah. To outsiders, these little gestures looked like proof of a perfect marriage. Evenings in the Miller home were simple but warm. After supper, David sat with the children, helping Lily read or letting Ben pretend to drive a tractor on his lap. Sarah often watched with pride. Neighbors compared the Millers to other families in town. Some men drank too much. Some couples fought loud enough for everyone to hear. But David and Sarah seemed different. Steady, loving, trustworthy. Sarah's life was full of routine. She cooked, cleaned, and cared for the children with a soft but firm hand. Lily adored her, always following close behind with questions. Ben, younger and more playful, clung to her with complete trust. David too seemed proud of his wife. He never raised his voice at her in public, never embarrassed her as some husbands did. People believed Sarah had struck gold with him. She only smiled politely when they said so. She didn't need the words. She already knew she had a good life, or at least that's what she believed then. With 2 children at her side and a husband admired by the whole town, it seemed impossible that anything could shatter their picture of happiness. But small changes crept into the Miller household, so quiet at first that Sarah almost ignored them. David, once cheerful at the dinner table, grew silent. He pushed food around his plate, his eyes distant. When Lily tugged on his sleeve to show him her drawings, or when Ben asked him to play, his answers were short. He began leaving the house in the evenings. "I'm meeting a neighbor," he would say, or, "Some of the guys are getting together." At first Sarah believed him. He had always been dependable and people in town trusted him. But weeks turned into months and his absences became too frequent. She noticed the way conversations at church stopped when she walked into the room, the way women exchanged glances behind her back. Something was wrong. The not knowing tore at her heart more than the truth itself could have. The truth reached her on an ordinary morning at the general store. Sarah had gone early, hoping to choose fabric before the shelves were picked over. Ruth was home with Lily and Ben, so Sarah moved freely for once, her hands brushing over patterns of cloth. Around her, a group of women whispered in low voices. She felt their eyes on her, quick sideways glances full of pity and judgment. Finally, Nancy, one of the more outspoken women, leaned close. "Sarah, you really don't know?" she asked. Sarah frowned. "Know what?" she said softly. The women shifted uncomfortably, some looking away. But Nancy pressed on. "David. You're David. He's been seen with Emily Brown. Half the town knows. You mean to tell us you didn't?" Sarah's breath caught. The words hit her like a blow. Her hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the counter. "No," she whispered. "That can't be true. He's just been with friends." Nancy scoffed. "Everyone's seen it." Sarah's vision blurred. She could feel the weight of every glance in that store. Pity. judgment, smug satisfaction. She left the fabric behind and rushed out without another word. By the time she reached home, tears ran freely down her face. She stumbled into the house, sobs breaking loose. Lily and Ben clung to her sides, frightened by her grief. Ruth hurried in from the kitchen, alarm flashing in her eyes. "Sarah, child, what's happened?" she asked, her voice sharp with worry. Through broken sobs, Sarah forced out the words. "David, he's with Emily. Everyone knows." Ruth's lined face tightened, her eyes dark with sorrow. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she pulled Sarah close. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "If it's true, then David has shamed himself, not you. You hear me? You are not the one who should bow her head." Sarah clung to her mother-in-law's shoulder. "But how do I face him? How do I go on?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ruth stroked her hair, her voice steady. "You'll face him because you must. For Lily. For Ben. You won't let him see you broken. If he wants to leave, let him say it here in front of me. Until then, you hold your head high." Sarah swallowed hard, her tears spilling over again. The words became her anchor, even as her heart split with betrayal. That evening when David returned, the house was heavy with silence. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her hands pressed flat on the wood to steady herself. Ruth watched from the stove, her eyes steady on her son. David shut the door and exhaled. His eyes didn't move from Sarah. "It's true," he said flatly. "I'm with Emily. I love her." The words pierced through the room. Sarah stared at him, searching for some trace of the man she had loved, but she saw only cold resolve. "I don't want to sneak around anymore," David continued. "You should pack your things. Take the kids and go back to your parents. I'll be bringing her here. Her place isn't much. This house makes more sense." Sarah's chest tightened. Leave the home she had poured herself into? It felt unthinkable. Before Sarah could speak, Ruth's chair scraped sharply against the floor. She stood, her back straight, her eyes locked on her son. "This house is mine, David. My name is on the deed, not yours. And if you think I'll allow you to throw out Sarah and these children, you've lost your mind." David's face flushed with anger. "Ma, don't start. I understand plenty." Ruth cut him off, her voice iron strong. "You've broken your vows. You want to leave? Fine. But you will not destroy this home. Sarah and the children stay. You go." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the old wall clock. David's hands clenched and unclenched, his jaw tight. For a moment Sarah thought he might argue, but then his shoulders slumped. Without another word he turned and walked out. The sound of the door closing echoed through the house. Sarah's breath caught. A part of her wanted to beg him to stay, but another part, the bruised, betrayed part, kept her silent. She sagged against the table, sobs breaking free again. "How do I live without him? I love him, Ma. Even now," she whispered. Ruth sat beside her, pulling her into an embrace. "You'll live because you must," she said firmly. "For Lily. For Ben. They need you more than he does. You're stronger than you think." The next morning Sarah woke to silence. David's boots no longer sat by the door. His jacket no longer hung on the hook. His absence pressed heavy in every corner. But life didn't pause. The children needed breakfast. The fire needed tending. Ruth reminded her, standing still is not an option. Within days Sarah made a decision. She would return to work at the township hall. She had left her job years ago when Lily was born, believing her place was at home. Now work might give her purpose again. The township commissioner welcomed her back quickly. "We're glad to have you, Sarah," he said, handing her a stack of ledgers. Settling into the rhythm of office work wasn't easy. She had to relearn details and routines. But Sarah was determined. She filed permits, typed up meeting minutes, balanced accounts. Quiet, steady tasks that gave her ground to stand on. Meanwhile, Ruth stepped in fully with the children. She walked Lily to school, held Ben's hand as they crossed the street, told them stories from her own youth. Sarah's heart eased knowing her children were safe with their grandmother. Occasionally, envelopes arrived with money from David. True to his word, he sent support. But Sarah couldn't bring herself to use it. She tucked each check into a wooden box in her dresser drawer. "You should use it," Ruth said once. "It's for the children." Sarah only shook her head. "Not like this. We'll manage." And manage they did. It wasn't easy, but Sarah kept her children clothed, fed and warm. She baked small cakes for birthdays, stitched gifts with her own hands. Her job at the hall gave her just enough stability to keep the family afloat. At night, when Lily and Ben were asleep, Sarah often sat by the lamp, finishing paperwork she had brought home. Her eyes burned with exhaustion, but she pressed on. Strength isn't given, she thought. It's made piece by piece. Neighbors began to notice. She's tougher than she looks, they whispered. She's doing right by those kids. Sarah didn't care about their words. What mattered was tucking her children into bed every night and seeing them safe. December brought bitter winds and gray skies. Christmas loomed, but Sarah dreaded it. David had always cut the tree, carried it into the living room, laughed with the children while they decorated. Now she braced herself for a holiday that would feel empty. But days before Christmas, a knock sounded at the door. Sarah opened it to see David standing there, his breath rising in the cold air, his eyes downcast. Behind him, Lily and Ben rushed forward. "Daddy, can we go pick the tree?" Ben shouted, tugging at his father's coat. David looked at Sarah, waiting. Her arms folded tightly. For a long moment, silence stretched. Then she sighed and nodded. "Go ahead. Just bundle them up warm." The children squealed with delight as David led them to his truck. They drove to the tree farm, rows of snow-dusted evergreens stretching across the hill. Lily pointed at the tallest one. Ben argued for a short, fat tree. David crouched to negotiate, laughing with them. For a while, it felt like nothing had broken, as though betrayal was just a bad dream. When they returned, the children dragged the tree inside with David's help. The living room filled with pine scent. Sarah handed them ornaments. The paper angel Lily had made, the star with Ben's handprint. Ruth watched from her chair, mist in her eyes. The tree glowed with lights when it was done. Sarah smiled faintly, but deep inside her heart ached. Trust, once broken, did not mend easily. In the weeks after Christmas, David appeared more often. At first it was little things, bringing firewood, fixing a squeaky hinge, mending a broken step. Soon he stayed for supper, tucking the children into bed as if nothing had happened. Clothes reappeared in drawers. Boots stood by the door. To outsiders, the Millers looked whole again. But inside Sarah's heart, the wound remained. She smiled when she had to, laughed for the children, but at night she lay awake staring at the ceiling. Ruth noticed but said nothing. She let him stay, but her eyes followed him with quiet warning. One damp afternoon in early spring, Sarah returned from work carrying files. As she neared the gate, she froze. Emily Brown stood on the sidewalk, pale and fragile, her coat pulled tight. Her eyes were ringed with exhaustion. "Sarah," Emily whispered, voice raw. Sarah's chest burned. "We have nothing to say," she replied coldly. But Emily fell to her knees in the mud, clutching Sarah's coat. "Please. I'm carrying his child. Why won't you let him go? He belongs to me." Sarah's anger rose, but she saw the desperation in Emily's trembling hands. Before Sarah could respond, Emily staggered toward the riverbank. "Emily, stop!" Sarah shouted, dropping her files. Emily reached the swollen river, her body trembling. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. Then she stepped forward. Without thinking, Sarah leapt after her. The icy water closed over her head, stealing her breath. She fought to the surface, spotting Emily's coat beneath the current. With all her strength, she dragged Emily upward. "Hold on," Sarah cried, but Emily was limp. Panic surged as Sarah kicked against the current. Her muscles burned, but she refused to let go. At last she pulled Emily onto the muddy bank, pressing down on her chest, begging her to breathe. For a terrifying moment, Emily lay still. Then water spilled from her mouth and she coughed violently. Relief flooded Sarah as sirens wailed in the distance. Paramedics hurried down the bank, wrapping Emily in blankets, strapping her to a stretcher. "You saved her," one said. "And the baby too." Sarah only nodded, shivering. She watched silently as the ambulance doors closed. Her body ached, but her heart ached more. She had jumped in after the woman who had shattered her family, and discovered she still had the strength for mercy. 2 days later, Sarah went to the hospital. She told herself it was duty, maybe closure. But when she pushed open the door to the maternity ward, her breath caught. David sat by Emily's bed, holding her hand gently. Emily's pale face softened with a smile as she looked at him. The sight was a knife in Sarah's chest. The man who had returned to her table, who had tucked their children in, now sat tenderly beside the woman who had ruined everything. Tears filled Sarah's eyes. She turned and fled down the hall, her footsteps echoing against the tiles. Back home, Sarah's sorrow hardened into fury. She marched to the bedroom, pulling David's shirts from the dresser, his boots from the corner, his razor from the shelf. Each item landed in a pile on the floor. Ruth entered, alarmed. "Sarah, what are you doing?" she asked. Sarah's voice shook but was firm. "He's gone. This time for good. I saw him at the hospital, holding her hand like I never existed." Ruth's eyes tightened, sorrow and anger mixing. "Then you're right," she said. "Forgiveness becomes weakness when a man repeats the same wound." That night David came home. His face was weary, his eyes pleading. "Sarah, listen." She threw the duffel bag at his feet. "Take it. You don't live here anymore. Go to her, go anywhere, but don't come back." David looked from Sarah to his mother, desperate for support. But Ruth's eyes were cold. "She's right, David. You've burned this bridge too many times." Defeated, he picked up the bag and left. Sarah stood at the window long after, her reflection blurred by tears. This time her decision was final. Months passed. Then one October morning, Sarah received a call at Township Hall. The hospital staff's voice was clipped, official. "Emily Brown passed away early this morning. Complications during childbirth. But the baby survived, a healthy boy. With no spouse or family listed, he will enter protective custody unless the father claims him." Sarah's hand froze on the receiver. That evening she told David outside his brother's garage. "She's gone," she said quietly. His rag slipped from his hand. "Gone?" he whispered, his face ashen. "And the baby?" "A boy," Sarah answered. "They need you to prove you're the father." The next day, David signed the papers at the hospital, trembling as he scrawled his name. When the nurse placed the infant in his arms, his chest heaved with a sob. "You're all that's left," he whispered. "And I won't fail you." Emily's funeral was small, quiet. Ruth attended, but Sarah stayed home with the children. Later, David returned carrying the baby in a car seat too big for him. "Ma," he said, voice breaking. "This is Daniel. I can't do this alone. Please help me." Ruth's eyes misted as she took the baby gently. "Family takes care of its own," she whispered. Sarah stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her body stiff. But when Ruth placed the baby in her arms, something shifted. The weight was light yet grounding. She looked down into Daniel's tiny face, his fists curling, his breath soft. The baby was blameless. Tears filled her eyes. "He stays," she whispered. Lily and Ben tiptoed closer, wide-eyed. "Is he ours too?" Lily asked. Sarah nodded. "Yes. He's family." That night, Sarah rocked the baby by the fire, his head against her chest. For the first time in months she felt peace. The perfect picture of family was gone. But in its place was something stronger. Resilience, compassion, and a love that refused to break. Thanks you for watching, and please remember to tell us where you are watching from today. Hit the like button, comment, and subscribe to this channel for more of this.